So through the school year, as a church body, we're focusing on one short little phrase, restoring an authentic faith. And there's a lot involved with what that means. And so this fall season, we're really focusing in on the first word, restoration. And as we've studied through and kind of discovered maybe more about what restoration means, we started by looking at the book of Nehemiah. And as we studied through that book together, that is a book that is about the restoration of the physical walls around Jerusalem. And as those physical walls were being restored, as that book went along, there was a powerful lesson at the end of that book that we found together. Essentially, the book of Nehemiah lets us know that we need more than physical restoration. We need a heart restoration. But that heart restoration that we need is beyond our ability to repair. And Nehemiah teaches us essentially, and it reveals to us, that our heart is broken and we're not able to fix it on our own. And now last week we started this new series that we're continuing on today called The Heart of Restoration. And what we're doing through this series is we're looking at how God had promised. He had made this promise to us multiple times. We saw one in Ezekiel. He's made a promise that he will accomplish that restoration that we weren't able to do. Last week we read Ezekiel. In Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 26, it says, "I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh." So God promises to accomplish the restoration that we need, the restoration we can't do on our own. And when Jesus comes and arrives here on this earth, it's God arriving in a human body, and he's come to make good on that promise. Jesus came to fulfill those words of Ezekiel I just read. Jesus fulfills that promise that God made us, that he would be able to restore our heart. Okay, that was pretty much the recap of where we've been so far this fall. Now, where are we going today? Today we're going to figure out where the starting point is at. We need to figure out where the starting point is at. In fact, I got questions about that after last week's service, so I knew this was the right message, right? Where is the starting point for all this? Last week we heard that the promise is possible. God has proved to us that he can do this restoration. Now it's time to ask the question, how does that restoration happen? Where do we start? And just a quick side note, I'll be honest, there is a direct route, as it were, to answer that question. I could turn the pages of the Bible up here and go to a book like Romans or the Gospels in the New Testament and be able to answer that question in maybe one or two verses for you. But that's not going to be our approach today. We're going to take more of an indirect route to answer that question, where do we start? And maybe that's confusing. Why would we take the indirect route? Why would we go a different direction than just going right to the passage and reading it? And I know it sounds odd, but let me give you an illustration that'll maybe help capture why it is we're going to take the indirect route today. Imagine that it is the middle of the summertime, right? Imagine there's not the big piles of snow outside, but imagine it's the middle of summertime and you want to go on a family road trip, a family vacation, and you've decided that you want to make it down to Cody, Wyoming for the day, for that night. You're going to spend the night there, all right? There's a couple different ways that you could get there, right? The fast route, the more direct route, the smoother route would maybe to go like over towards Bridger and then go like straight down to Wyoming, right? Straight down to Cody. And if you took that route, you could be there in about an hour and 45 minutes. No problem, right? But there's also a slower path that you could take, a more indirect path. You could wind and weave over the Beartooth Pass. And someone could possibly argue and say, boo, right? The Beartooth Pass, that takes forever. All the winds and the turns, it's slow, right? It's the indirect path. But there is something beautiful on that route that we would not see in the more direct route. Now, this morning, we're going to answer the question, where do we start when it comes to this idea of heart restoration? Where is the starting point? And I'm going to essentially give you the scenic tour over the Beartooth Pass to get there, right? Ultimately, we will end up in the same destination. We'll end up with the same answer of how it is where we start in this road of restoration. But the scenic path we're on today, it's going to reveal some stunning beauty of the Old Testament for us. Maybe give us a little bit deeper insight into this starting point that we're at today. Okay, so to answer that question, where do we start in order to experience this heart restoration? We're going to go look at two moments in the Old Testament. Two extremely important, pivotal moments in the Old Testament. One moment is the dedication of the temple, and the other moment is the dedication of the law. Okay, dedication of the temple and dedication of the law. These two moments will lay the foundation for us of where to start for this heart restoration that we are on in this path. So let's set off on this journey and take a look at the dedication of the temple. And in a moment, we're going to read from 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 11. So if you have your Bible or your phone, you can start turning there. And basically building up to this moment, we're jumping in the middle of kind of this book of Chronicles, and building up to chapter 7, a lot has happened. King David's son, King Solomon, he has built the temple. And in chapter 6, he had this dedication prayer for the temple, right? And then in chapter 7, God answers Solomon's prayer of dedication for the temple. And what God says is extremely impactful to us. So let's check it out and see what happens. In 2 Chronicles chapter 7, I'll start reading in verse 11. When Solomon had finished the temple of the Lord and the royal palace, and had succeeded in carrying out all he had in mind to do in the temple of the Lord and in his own palace, the Lord appeared to him at night and said, I have heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a temple for sacrifices. But when I shut up the heavens so that there is no rain, or command the locusts to devour the land, or send a plague among the people, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. So this dedication moment at the temple, right? This is like the first scenic pass as you're going over the Beartooth Pass, where it's like, wow, this beautiful vista, dedication moment of the temple. And if we're reading really closely, notice God says something weird in that passage. He says that word when. When I shut up the heavens so that there's no rain, or command locusts to devour the land, or send a plague among the people. And all those elements that he's talking about right there, the drought, the locust, the plague, those are all references to Deuteronomy chapter 28. And these are the direct consequences of what happens when the Israelites betray God. These are the things that happen when they betray God. And so at this moment of the dedication of the temple, it's sort of an awkward moment, right? It's kind of that weird silence in between when after God speaks, where everyone kind of, really? Is that what he said? Because the temple just was finished and dedicated, and God responds to this dedication prayer by essentially saying, well, guys, the temple still has that new car smell, I know. It's brand new, right? But when you crash that new car, when you drive it into a ditch, when you wreck it beyond repair, and that's a bit ominous. That's an ominous thing for God to say at the dedication of the temple, right? It's not if we betray God, it's when we betray God. And when we betray God, when we realize that our heart has a brokenness that is beyond our ability to repair, what does the passage say to do? Where's our starting point? It says it in verse 14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. So this starting point that gets emphasized in verse 14 pretty much has 4 key distinctives, right? Humble ourselves, pray, seek, and turn. And there's a pretty famous commentator who was talking about this passage, and he said, basically, those are not 4 independent steps to take. It's not step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Those are all 4 key descriptions that describe what our heart will be like in that moment. Those 4 key descriptions summarize our core attitude that we will have at the starting point. The starting point for heart restoration is that we will humble ourselves and come to God in prayer seeking repentance, seeking a changed heart. And this is sort of a wild passage to reflect on, this moment of the dedication of the temple, because this is the type of passage that maybe as we think about the Old Testament, as we think about the temple, this is the moment that many of us would expect God to give a way different answer, right? I mean, this is the temple. We almost expect God to say, okay, well, if you crash this car, I tell you what, go up, sacrifice an animal, maybe sacrifice a lamb, but that's not what he says in this passage. This is the dedication moment of the temple, and God says, when you inevitably crash this car, when everything goes sideways, the starting point for restoration is this: humble ourselves, come to God in prayer, seeking to change our heart. And if some of us didn't know better, and I was to maybe say a phrase like that, you might even think that that came from the New Testament Gospels or from Romans or something like that, not the Old Testament, where it's describing the dedication of the temple. But that starting point for heart restoration that God promises has always remained the same. It's always been humble ourselves and come to God in prayer, seeking to turn, seeking a changed heart. All right, we are on the scenic route. We're starting to understand that starting point, and we just made some observations around the dedication of the temple. But let's go back even further. There's one more sight to see, and it's the dedication of the law itself, right? There's a powerful moment that happens at the dedication of the law. And the Old Testament law, which sometimes gets referred to, maybe you've heard of the phrase, the law of Moses, right? The Old Testament law. These laws were given to the Israelites when they came out of Egypt and they were at Mount Sinai, right? And at Mount Sinai, out in the desert, God gave Moses the laws like the 10 Commandments, and he carries them down off the mountain and he gives them to the Israelites. And the Israelites start cheering, right? They start celebrating. Everybody starts giving out one of those hip, hip, hooray, right? When the laws come down off the mountain. The reason they celebrated was because these laws that they were making a commitment to follow were the condition to allow them to enter the promised land. Yes, get to enter the promised land. Now, right before the Israelites enter the promised land, immediately prior, Moses stands up in front of the Israelites and he gives a sermon. He gives a message. And he gives this huge message, and Moses, in that message, is essentially reminding the people what they've made a commitment to, what it is that they are committing to, and these new laws that are being dedicated right before they enter into the promised land. So this huge sermon message of dedication has the name, right? Drum roll. It's the book of Deuteronomy. It's a giant sermon message. It's the dedication of the laws right before they go into the promised land. In fact, the first verse of Deuteronomy even states, essentially letting the reader know that this is a message from Moses to the people. Moses is standing up and giving a speech, this book of Deuteronomy. It says in verse 1, "These are the words of Moses that he spoke to all the Israelites in the wilderness east of the Jordan." So this Deuteronomy sermon happens right before they cross the Jordan River, right before they enter the Promised Land, and Moses repeats for a second time the laws that the people have promised and committed to follow. Hence the name Deuteronomy, right? The second statement of the law. That's what that name is essentially communicating to us. It's the second time the law is restated. But something strange happens in the book of Deuteronomy, in this sermon message that Moses is giving, because the book of Deuteronomy has a shocking and bizarre ending. It almost pulls one of those Nehemiah moments on us, right? The book of Nehemiah. The ending of the book of Deuteronomy, this Deuteronomy sermon, is not at all what we would be expecting Moses to say. And let me share with you an excerpt from this Moses Deuteronomy sermon from chapter 30. And I'm going to pause between the first few verses because these words are maybe so unexpected for us to hear that they might go right over our head at first. So I'm going to pause between those first couple verses just so we kind of start to understand what Moses himself is saying to the people in this book of Deuteronomy, chapter 30. Verse 1 says, "When all these blessings and curses I've set before you come on you, and you take them to heart, wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations." All right, pause for a moment, right? That's a weird way to start saying something, right? Moses is essentially saying, when you fail. These curses and blessings is essentially a way of saying, if you obey or disobey, when you disobey, when you rebel, when you wreck the car, right? What does Moses go on to say in verse 2? "And when you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and with all your soul, according to everything I have commanded you today." So, verse 1 said, you're going to fail, essentially, right? And verse 2 says, "But there will be a way for your heart to be restored." There will be some sort of restoration that's coming. All right, let's keep reading through the rest of this passage. "Then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you and gather you again from all the nations where he scattered you, even if you have been banished to the most distant lands under heaven. From there your Lord your God will gather you and bring you back. He will bring you to the land that belonged to your ancestors, and you will take possession of it. He will make you more prosperous and numerous than your ancestors. The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul and live." Isn't it a wild thing to kind of picture this book of Deuteronomy right before they enter the promised land? And at that moment, when Moses is reciting all the laws a second time, right? Essentially this law dedication ceremony, the main application point of Moses' sermon. The main application point is that, yep, you're going to fail. Yikes, right? Yep, you're going to wreck the new car. But at the same time, Moses shows them where their ultimate hope will be at. At the same time that, and this hope that Moses describes in this passage, it is the same hope that we have today, right? He says God will give us a new heart. God will essentially turn our heart of stone into a heart of flesh. These two passages together, the dedication of the temple and the dedication of the law, they give us a powerful insight into the starting point for that heart restoration that we need. These two passages help us better understand the environment in which God will work to provide us with a new heart. As we saw in the first passage, that dedication to the temple passage, the starting point for heart restoration is to humble ourselves and come to God in prayer, seeking to turn, seeking that change. And I just wanted to expand for just a minute or two on what that word means, to humble ourselves, because these two passages together help describe that atmosphere, what it means to humble ourselves. Here's the first observation. We need to realize that we have a broken heart in need of repair. That's what's entailed with humbling ourselves. That's something we see in these passages. Sometimes we can be in a little bit of denial, right? We can say things like, I'm not actually broken. Nope, not me. Other times we might be stuck in a little bit of ignorance, right? We might say things like, well, at least I'm not as bad as that person over there. Humbling ourselves is the moment where we can be honest, where we can say, yep, my heart is broken and messed up. And this is where Moses' Deuteronomy sermon becomes so powerful, right? Because essentially at the end of restating all the laws, Moses essentially is telling them the laws and rules don't fix your heart. What the laws and rules do is they reveal that your heart is broken. Moses is the guy who delivered the law down off of Sinai, right? He was carrying it in his hands. He brought it to the people. And even Moses himself, at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, he says things, even more than what we read. He says things like in chapter 31, verse 29, he says, "For I know that after my death, you are sure to become utterly corrupt and to turn from the ways I have commanded you." Yikes. That's Moses himself, the guy who was carrying the laws, is saying, yeah, you can't do this. You're going to mess it up. There's that moment of reflection where we kind of want to go, man, Moses, Deuteronomy, that was a great pep talk, right? Essentially, he says, you're going to fail, right? You're going to crash the car. But did you also see what Moses was trying to do with those words? Do you see the application point of Deuteronomy? It's to humble ourselves and realize that we have broken hearts in need of repair. The law of Moses helps to humble us. The laws help us to see that we need the Lord our God to circumcise our hearts so that we may love with all of our heart and all of our soul. So that first observation, what it means to humble ourselves, it's to realize that we have a broken heart in need of repair. But to humble ourselves, there's also something else involved with what that means in these passages. See, to humble ourselves also means that regardless of how broken we are not beyond repair. Regardless of how broken we are not beyond repair. And that seems like an odd thing. That has to do with humility? Really? What does that have to do with humility? If someone was to say something like, I'm a terrible person, things will never change. It's not possible that my heart could be fixed. You know what that person's problem is? They're not actually being humble. If we say, I'm broken beyond any hope, that's essentially saying that, God, you know what? My heart of stone, you can't fix it. You're not powerful enough to fix me. I know you promised you could, but I'm a little bit different. I'm a harder case than what you're capable of handling, right, God? I know, God, you promised you could do this, but I'm just too much of a mess for you to handle. Are you recognizing it? why it is that someone who's saying, I'm a terrible person and things will never, ever change, it's a lack of humility that they're tripping over. Because verse 14 of what we read in 2 Chronicles, it makes it really clear. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, and then what does God say? Then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sins, and I will heal their land. If you want to see God doing a powerful work in your life, here's where you can start right now. That starting point. We can step into that starting point right now together. We can start by humbling ourselves. And it's a painful process. It was painful and awkward to even read the words of Moses in Deuteronomy, right? Humbling ourselves can be a painful process. Humility is recognizing that we have a heart that is in need of repair. Maybe humility means recognizing that, maybe it was wrong when I said that lie last week. Humility means recognizing, that thing I said to that other person that hurt them, that was not good. That was wrong of me. I'm going to pause for a moment right now, and I just want you in your mind to just think of that thing, whatever it is, right? Humility means recognizing that I was wrong when I fill in the blank. Just spend a moment, I'll give you a couple of seconds just to think of that. What is that thing? Now, humbling ourselves is not only about recognizing our mistakes, right? That can be kind of painful. It's not only about recognizing our mistakes. The true humility that these passages are talking about, humility is also recognizing that regardless of how broken we are not beyond repair. So here comes the second part of what it means to humble ourselves, right? I want you to take whatever those things were that you thought of in your mind, whatever those things where you said, I was wrong and here's what I want you to do next. I want you to take that thing, whatever it is, and I want you to visualize that thing and recognize, say in your mind, that this does not prevent God from being capable of restoring my heart. I'll give you a moment. Whatever that thing was that you had in your mind, God is bigger than that mistake. God is still capable of restoring your heart. You have some great elders at this church. And this last week, I heard one of them essentially summarize everything we just learned today. And he said it in this way: God's job is to do the fixin'. Your job is to be available. God's job is to do the fixing. Your job is to be available. So are you available? Have we humbled ourselves? We're going to close this message with just an opportunity to just take a moment where in this space, we've been doing this work of humbling ourselves. This is an opportunity to just pray together. I'm going to lead the prayer and just seek God's face. So just take a moment. If you want, you can repeat. I'll leave some pauses. You can repeat the words I'm saying, and they can be your words and your prayers as well. If you've got other things you want to talk with God about, there's going to be a couple little pauses where you can fill in those blanks. Let's pray together. Father, I've made mistakes. God, I'm sorry about that. And even though there's that guilt, I know that I'm not beyond your ability to fix. Jesus, you came to restore my heart. Jesus, you proved that you can heal my heart by raising from the dead. And now I ask you to heal my heart, to start that work. You say that if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. God, your word promises that you have heard my prayer. And God, your word says that you have forgiven my sin. Thank you. Amen. That process of just approaching God, man, that is the starting point, right? That is the moment where God starts working in our heart, changing things. We make ourselves available, and he does the work of fixing us. In Romans chapter 10, it talks about kind of this moment that we just had of coming before God. And it says that if you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. There's part of that verse that we haven't done. There's a lot of power in speaking, right, and telling others. And man, if you prayed that prayer with me, if you know that God's working in your heart, Romans talks about it. There is power in sharing what God is doing in your life with others and putting it into words or putting it on a piece of paper. So I would just encourage you sometime today, talk with a friend, talk with a neighbor sitting beside you. Just share with them that commitment, that what you just prayed, how God is working in your heart. Talk with Josh or I. If you're a little nervous to tell someone about it, you can just, on one of those little feedback forms, the I'm new here card, just fill out on there, or one of the prayer request cards, just fill that out and put it in the box. Man, there's something powerful about sharing what God is doing in our life. We would love to celebrate with you that work that God is starting to do. Let's pray, and we're going to have our closing song. Father, I just thank you for just how powerful your word is. We can read Deuteronomy and get the same message as Romans. We can read 2 Chronicles, and it's like we're reading the Gospels. You have always been the one that we needed. It's always been about what you were going to do in our life and the work that you were going to do in changing our heart. And it's always been about that question. Are we available? Are we willing to humble ourselves, to turn, to seek, to pray, and to see you start working? Father, I pray that this week that you would just be working in our lives, that you would start this process of change and transformation as we get to be amazed by the fact that you are bigger and more powerful than even our worst mistakes. Be working in our heart, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.